Behind the Shades.
We're discussing divorce and custody, right?
Yes, absolutely. My main areas of expertise.
Perfect. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but I'll say it's a good thing that you're helping people, right?
Yes, that's the way I look at it. Absolutely.
Perfect. Perfect. So let's start officially. And why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself, who you are, and where my audience can find you, Tracey?
Okay, sure. So I am Tracey B. I am a former family law attorney. Now I am a pro se advocate, pro se coach, and pro se strategist. I work with people who are represented, but my main focus is people who are going through the family court system and they're representing themselves. They are brave enough to represent themselves. So I am coaching them through that whole process. I'm teaching them some of the tricks and tips that attorneys use. I'm teaching them how the court process works, and I'm also showing them how to navigate it without spending their kids' college funds and their retirements. Yeah, so that's what I do. I've been doing that for the last couple of years. I've been in family law for about 20 years now. And yeah, I am a blogger, a writer, a mom, an entrepreneur. And where you can find me, my company is called The Divorce Solutionist, because I provide solutions to every problem that you have in your divorce and or custody matter. So on Instagram, I'm at The Divorce Solutionist. On Facebook, I'm at The Divorce Solutionist. And on TikTok, I am the Family Court Strategist on TikTok. So there, and on YouTube, I'm the Divorce Solutionist on YouTube as well. So there you have it.
Thank you. That is such a wonderful introduction. I'm going to tell you something, Tracey. I have so many questions for you because I want to make sure that, one, I don't get divorced, but let's say something happens and my wife at that time loses her mind because I'm such an amazing man, right? And decides to leave me. Then I want to be protected as well. So take us through the beginning. How did you get involved in divorce and why family court specifically when there's so many other different types of law to be practicing in?
I am an altruist by nature. I've always served people. My first profession was in mental health. So I've always served a population that needed help. And so I gravitated toward family law, actually by default. It wasn't planned that way, but I found my way in it and wind up staying because I loved it so much. I love helping people, trying to salvage their families as much as possible. And that's, it's not an easy thing because it's constant emergencies and putting fires out and crises and all that stuff. But it's so rewarding when I hear someone come back to me to tell me that they were able to get, custody of their kids because of something that I helped them with. So that's so much more fulfilling. And yeah, it's something, like I said, I fell into, but once I found myself in it, I just decided to stay, and here I am.
So I know for a lot of men out there, when they hear family court, they're like, right? It can be scary to a lot of men. What are some of the misconceptions maybe that we have of the family court system that you want to maybe debunk today?
Oh, I have a few of them. A lot of people think, number one, that all judges are pro moms and none of them are pro dads. That is not the truth at all. That is not the truth. There are some states where the law is automatically 50-50. So it doesn't matter whether you're, a likable dad or a likable mom. That's the starting point. So in those states, particularly, dads get, equal treatment. In Florida, actually, just recently, Florida passed a law where dads are automatically presumed to be the dad in custody matters, where they don't have to establish paternity and all of that stuff. They're starting at an equal playing field to begin with, which is great. Another myth is that when you go to court, the judge wants to hear, wants to hear all the bad things that the other party did. They want to hear how they broke up, how they were before the kids came into play. The courts don't want to hear any of that. The courts really do not want to hear bickering parents. They just don't. They'd rather you settle it in mediation and come to them with a parenting plan that's ready to go, or divorce agreement that's ready to go. They don't want to hear bickering. They really don't want to do that. The other thing is that most people think that family court is about fairness. It's about the best interest of the child, and it's not. Family court is really about what's efficient for family court, period. Family court is not necessarily the place that you want to air out your dirty family laundry, because it can be judges are they get to the point that a lot of them have gotten to the point where they have what's called compassion fatigue. So they don't empathize with the fact that your kids are crying about not going to the other parent's home, or that, you know, they don't care about that. They hear this stuff all day. So your story is no different than anybody else's. They're not going to look at you and see your little weepy eyes and say, you know what, I feel so sorry for you. Let me just grant you whatever you're at. It doesn't work like that. Family court is really destructive. It really actually creates more conflict than it helps to solve. And I think that's the biggest myth that's out there. There's a lot of people, most people don't know that until they've been in the family court system for at least one round of custody or divorce. Then they realize, they start to see the truth, that the judge doesn't care about evidence. The judge doesn't care about how bad they were treated. The judge doesn't care about the fact that they were emotionally abused. The judge doesn't care about the fact that they were physically abused. The judge doesn't care anything about that. The judge cares about getting you out of their courtroom, period. They don't want you there. That's what they want. They want you to resolve things on your own. So those are some of the major myths.
I know for me, I took law up to paralegal in my education, and I saw, because of the law firm that I was working at when I was getting my experience and things like that, it was brief. It was about a year. I remember seeing, and all the hours you had to put in, I remember seeing different courtrooms. So I saw the family court system a little bit, and I saw the criminal and the real estate and things like that, because it was part of our experience. And I remember seeing family court, and I was like, this is not for me. Because to your point, I went into there thinking, okay, what's fair to everyone involved? I came out and I was like, wow, they're like, okay, this is what you're going to do. This is how you're going to do it. And if you don't, you're in contempt.
That's it.
Right?
That's exactly right.
And when I used to hear people who don't have that experience, who I guess they see what they see on TV and things like that, because everyone thinks it's paramason, right? Where I'm like, aha, I have the smoking gun. It's going to turn everything.
So true. Yep.
Right. But it's more so, okay, I spoke to a lawyer and I was working with a lawyer, and the judge said, okay, if you want your children go to this school, you're planning to move out of state. So if the child was with you 100% of the time, are you going to drive across state lines to drop that kid to school? Or you're going to remove and just uproot that child from everything? And the parent was like, oh, I didn't think of that. That's what you have to think of when you go to family court. So Tracey, when you're helping people to prepare themselves, are they naive enough thinking that, well, I'm a good guy, I should get the children? Like, how do you help them prepare and maybe help them get over some of the naivety that they may be experiencing before they actually get into the courtroom?
That's an excellent question. The people who are first-time family court litigants, I often suggest to them that they go watch YouTube videos, that they go read blogs, that they join Facebook groups, that they join Reddit groups, so they can hear the reality. Because a lot of times people are so disillusioned about the process. I mean, it's amazing how many people are so disillusioned by the process because they've never been through it. And then they're blindsided because they went in there with this naive thinking. So a lot of times, if they're coming to me, especially for coaching, I often tell them, you have to start with finding out the truth. And that truth is going to be exposed to you by, like I just said, joining groups, support groups, Reddit groups, Facebook groups, watching videos. I mean, whatever you can find out the truth, that's what you need to do. Because the better prepared you are by not having all these, ideal images of what it's going to be like, the better you are positioning yourself to get the outcome that you want. And so, yes, I always start them with that. And then I also always tell them to visit their court's website. I always tell people, go onto your court's website. There's a wealth of information on there. You should not go into court not knowing where you stand, what to call the judge, what custody means. You should not. There's no way you should go in there without knowing that. And believe it or not, there's some people who are represented by attorneys who don't have a clue because their attorneys don't even explain the process to them. So it's your job. When you're a first-time litigant, it's your job to do your own due diligence. No, don't rely on anybody else feeding that stuff to you. Do as much research as you can before you step foot in there. And that way you won't be blindsided, because a lot of times when people are blindsided, they make themselves vulnerable. And that's where the attack comes in. And that's where those losses pile up because of that. So when you're working with me, I don't tolerate that. I'm competitive. You are not going to put yourself in a position to be vulnerable, to be attacked, to be decimated. Not when you're working with me. So yeah, that's that. I always give them those pieces of advice.
And I think at least in America, it's different from state to state. Like some states have no fault divorce, right? And some states, I believe, they don't have that. Where I am in Canada, it's more so, okay, my wife and I, we go to the court system and say, hey, this is not working out. We have a year of separation to make sure this is something we want to do. And then we go from there. But to your point, there's a lot of people that they would actually go into the court system, or at least prepare to be divorced, with their hands empty and their pockets even emptier. They have no idea what they're walking into. And when they walk into that situation and they get destroyed, they come out and they say, you know what? It's not my fault. It's Tracey's fault.
Exactly.
Right? Have you experienced
exactly
that?
What they did. Absolutely. I am every single day in my messaging, I'm constantly reminding people of that. You have to do, whether you have an attorney or you're self-represented, it is your responsibility to check your mindset, to make sure you're prepared, to make sure you do your own due diligence, to not give anybody 100% control over your case. It's your responsibility to do exactly that. Because what happens is you'll come out and you'll blame everybody else. You'll blame your ex or your soon-to-be ex. You'll blame the lawyers. You'll blame the judges. You'll blame everybody else for the outcomes except you. No one wants to take responsibility or accountability for the role they play. And believe it or not, I'm making enemies doing that. There's a lot of people like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. I've been doing this long enough. And I can assure you that if you constantly, some people, their representation is Facebook. Their lawyers are Facebook groups where they're getting legal advice from Facebook groups. And then they come back and talk about how tragic the outcome was. Well, yeah, you didn't do your own homework. You relied on advice from a bunch of non-lawyers who are just, you know how they have the jailhouse lawyers? They have Facebook lawyers now who think they get degrees because they've been in groups, and they got those honorary law degrees, and they're out there giving legal advice, and people actually taking it and applying it. And then they come back and say, hey, it's everybody's fault but mine. Well, that's what you get.
No one has more clients than a social media lawyer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's it. There you go. I might have to steal that one.
And we make light and I laugh because you can go on social media and you can say, oh, my back is hurting. And there's a doctor on social media that's going to prescribe you something. Oh, don't worry. You know what your medical doctor spent all those years doing. They don't know what they're talking about. Just pop these pills, lay down, and you'll be fine. And the one thing I love when it comes to like relationships, right, is they'll go to someone who has the worst track record in relationships, right?
Exactly.
And then they'll be like, oh, really? That happened to you? Okay, what did you do? And the person's like, oh, I went there and the judge, they're racist, they're sexist, they don't like me and things like that. And then when I listen to this stuff, I'm like, the judge doesn't care who you are. Right. After this case is done, they won't even know who you are. They will remember you. But sometimes we feel that we're so important that when we go in there, it's me versus the stenographer, the court officer, the judge, all the lawyers, including my own, It's the world against us. And one thing I want to ask you is, if I was going through a divorce and I have people chirping in the background, right, saying that men get the raw end of the stick, men get the short end of the stick, men get bullied in courts, no one's listening to us in the court. What are some of the ways that I can still prepare myself to, one, not fall into the trap of believing everything that people are telling me because their experience may not be mine, and two, to make sure that I get the outcome that I'm looking for?
One thing that I often mention to, I don't prefer men over women. I work with both equally. But one thing I do realize is that my approach to working with men is very different than my approach to when I'm working with women. Men always want to start from the top down. They want to start with the judge's supervisor and the legislature, or that's what they want to do, right? If something doesn't work out, they want to go right to the top. And I'm always trying to talk them down. That's not where you start. Don't automatically assume that the judge is not going to be on your side or it's going to be biased. Please don't assume that. Number one. Number two, it is so incredibly invaluable to research your judge. Get to know who your judge is, get to know who the players are in your courtroom, get to know who they are. The best way to influence someone or to persuade someone with your story or your argument is to know what appeals to them, right? You're not going to make the same argument to everybody because everybody doesn't care. We interpret information differently. We learn differently. So same thing in the courtroom. You want to know the judge. If you're going before the judge, know who your judge is. Know what matters to your judge. Know what preferences your judge has. That helps incredibly. It helps to know those things. And then the third thing is, you'd be amazed by how many people have no clue what the difference is between shared custody and 50-50 custody. Or sole custody and joint custody. So they go into court expecting, sole custody in a state that doesn't even award sole custody. And so when they don't get it, they think it's the judge's fault. No, well, had you done your research, you would know that in your specific state, joint custody is the presuming starting point. It's not because it's you and your dad and you're asking for sole. It's because that's not normally given in your state. So, and you'd be surprised how many people don't even do that. They don't even, man and woman, dad and mom, they don't even do that. So I think those three things are incredibly important. Don't start at the top. Don't be ready to go and seek out the judge's supervisor or the politicians or the legislatures in your jurisdiction because you're assuming that this judge is going to be biased. Please don't do that. Number two, like I said, research the judge. Judges their information is out there. Their prior decisions and rulings on cases like yours is out there. Sometimes it's not free and accessible, but you can pay a fee and get that information about your judge. And number three, do your research. Find out exactly what's in your favor before you walk in there requesting the sun, the moon, and the stars. You in your statement, and you may not be able to get the sun. You may be able to get the moon and the stars. So know that. So yeah, those three things are incredibly important. And dads, I do think dads get an unfair shake. I'm not gonna lie to you about that. There's some places where some dads, I have clients now who are fighting excellent dads, very hands-on from day one, from the time the baby was brought home. But because they weren't married, in some states they're presumed to be they're not considered what's called a primary caregiver because they were not in the home. And it's unfair because I have a client right now who literally went to the hospital, brought the girl home with the baby, and has been at the house every single day. They didn't live together, but he was there every single day. And he's still fighting a 2-year battle for 50-50 in New York. And it's unfair. It's really unfair. But that's exactly the law that Florida just enacted. They stopped that from that being the case in Florida. So hopefully there'll be some other states that'll follow suit. But for right now, yeah, I do think there are dads who get an unfair shake.
I want to say a little bit of a shout out to DeSantis there for making those laws in Florida. I know there's a lot of people that are on both sides when it comes to him, but it seems like he is trying to do his best into what the people want. And when you're describing that scenario, there's one person in particular, and he's a celebrity, and he was going through a horrific battle, it seemed, at least from his end, and it was Tyrese. And Tyrese was complaining about some of the things that you're mentioning. He was going in there and saying that everyone's against me and I don't know what's going on. I have to pay this child support. And he went there assuming a lot of things. And to your point, it was like, well, those things you don't get in the state that you live in. And New York seems to be quite a bit different when it comes to Florida in regards to how they proceed with the family courts. And I know sometimes children are involved in this when there's a divorce. So take us through the steps of how that part of the family court works when there's children involved and they're trying to differentiate between who's going to get shared custody, sole custody, and joint custody.
Okay, sure. So there are some states that have what's called a presumption that joint custody is best for the child. That means that that's the starting point, that the parent who's opposing joint custody has the burden of proving to the court why joint custody should not be the case, as opposed to the other party proving to the court why joint custody should be the case. And then there are some states where joint custody is basically it. That is the law. And then there's some states that don't have a presumption and don't have a law. It's just up in the air. And so New York is one of those states. New York is a state that they say that they presume it's joint custody, but it's not. New York is they will give sole custody in a heartbeat. And how they do that, they use every state, and in DC, uses what's called the best interest of the child factors. So every state has a set of guidelines or a set of factors, whether it's by statute or common law, where they use anywhere between 9 and 21 specific issues that they apply to every single custody case to determine which parent should get sole custody or if they should get joint custody. I will tell you this, any parenting arrangement where the parents do not communicate or they're unable to get along or there's history of domestic violence, joint custody is not going to happen, because to have joint custody, they have to be civil to each other. So in any state that there's a presumption or it's automatic, joint custody is not going to happen because of those things. And some states vary on other additional factors they will consider, but for the most part, that rules joint custody out. And what happens in those instances is one parent will get full custody, sole custody, or what's called primary residential. Depending on where you are, the terminology changes. Those best interests of the child factors usually focus on the well-being of the child, emotionally, physically, intellectually, developmentally, spiritually. Those things are what the factors are based on. So what does that mean? The judge is going to look, if you're in Pennsylvania, for instance, which has, I think, 19 or 21 factors, the judge is going to go through all 21 factors to determine which parent or both is going to best serve the child's emotional needs, physical needs, intellectual needs, everything in those things of that nature. There's some states that think that the person or the parent that was the primary caretaker is number one on the list. But for the most part, most judges look at who's going to make sure the kid's academic and developmental and physical well-being they're going to focus their attention on those top three things. Everything else is they're going to be secondary, third. They're going to go behind those top three factors they're going to consider. But yeah, that's what they do. Some states will require the parents to go through mediation before the judge actually gets the case. Some states will make the parents go through parenting courses before they actually get to decide who's going to get custody. Some states are way more intricate in how the parents build up to the judge deciding who gets custody. But for the most part, no matter where you are, every single state in DC has a set of factors that they're going to look at to determine who's going to get custody. What that process entails varies from state to state. How long it takes varies from state to state, because when there's some issues like a history of domestic violence or abuse or substance abuse or things of that nature, there's going to be other players who come in and they're going to be assigned, like a lawyer for the child, custody evaluators, parent coordinators, things of that nature. But all of those players determine how long the case is going to proceed and what's going to happen overall in the end to get to the point where the judge makes a decision.
So would it be something like, depending on the state, the burden may be on the other person who doesn't want me to get custody, and in some other states, the burden's on me to show that I deserve custody. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Depending on yes, depending on if it's a joint custody state or not. Definitely. That's just for custody. If you start to ask for, if you already went through custody and now you're going back to court asking for the judge to change custody, then it changes it. The burden shifts a little bit, and the requirements change a little bit. The rules change a little bit, just a little bit. But yeah, for the most part, in an initial custody or divorce that involves custody, yes, if you're in a joint custody presumption state and you're asking for sole custody, yes, you have to convince the judge why you should get sole custody, as opposed to if you're in a sole custody state. In a sole custody state, it depends on who's asking. So yeah.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So, and the reason why I wanted that clarified, because I know there's many people who go in there with the expectation that they're going to get custody of the child, but depending on where they are, they have to show the judge that, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Judge, based on the criteria of that state, this is why I believe I should get either joint custody, sole custody, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So when you mentioned the 19 to 20 factors on the criteria, is that the states that have this, is that specific to the individual and how they demonstrate it? For example, they have to have a place for the child to live. They have to be able to take care of the child. Like, what are some of the factors that play a part in who gets custody?
Absolutely. So definitely the place you live. And, people of the belief, oh, I want sole custody because dad or mom lives in a 2-bedroom with 4 other people, and my child won't have a separate bedroom. And I have a 3-bedroom home, and my child has a separate bedroom and a playroom. Well, that's not it. That's not it. As long as the child has a bed, that bed could be in a shared bedroom with somebody else, even an adult. If that's they just have to have a safe, clean environment, stable environment for the child to go to spend time in, pretty much, for the most part, right? And then some things like, academics. If you're talking about a parent who is involved in PTA and shows up at events, and the teacher reaches out to this parent all the time, and the parent reaches out to this teacher all the time and make sure they do their homework and helps them with the homework. And then the other parent is more like, oh, you figure out your homework on your own. I don't even know who your teacher is. I never show up at that's a factor. That's going to be considered, of course. Or if the child has special medical needs, and one parent is more of, the hands-on and fills prescriptions and take the child to specialists and take them to all appointments and knows the doctors, and the other parent maybe just shows up here and there. Of course, that's a factor. Or if, the parent that, both parents are remarried, and the parent that that's asking for to be the primary residential has kids in the home that the child has a very tight relationship with, and the other parent has no one. They're just living in the home by themselves. They have no extended family in the area. Yes, that's a factor. That's a factor. So things like that are a factor, because the bottom line is the court wants to see that the child's going to be in a safe and loving environment with people, family, extended family, who's going to love and care for them and help them flourish to be a productive adult, and someone who's not going to neglect their special needs or care that they need. Of course, in addition to, they can't be substance abusers or domestic violence abusers, or they can even be criminals. Their criminal background doesn't necessarily negate or prohibit them from becoming a custodial parent. It doesn't. It depends on what the crime is, of course. If they've been alleged to have abused a child, that's going to be way more heavy than someone who might have beat up another adult. So things like that definitely come into play as well.
And that clarifies a thought that I had in my head where some people will look at, let's say that one parent is rich. They have the big house and everything like that. And they would ask the question, why doesn't the child automatically go to that parent? Because they have all this money, all these resources, but they may be checking one or two boxes, but they may not have everything else. Is that
Right.
an accurate representation?
Exactly. Absolutely. The time, a lot of times when if the rich parent wins custody, I say wins with quotes because no one wins in family court. A lot of times it depends on so many other things, but it's not necessarily that they're the better parent. It could be that they had a high powered attorney who had, a much more close affiliations with the judge. Or it could be that the kid was old enough to have when kids get to a certain age in certain state, in every state, the kids have a say, what's called a say. They get to say which parent they'd rather live with. So in certain states, if the rich parent is in a state where a 14-year-old has a major significant weight into where they live, and that child chose the rich parent, then that might be the reason, but not necessarily because the rich parent has more resources than the other. And most states make that very clear that there's no preference over mom or dad, and there's no preference over financial, resources. As long as they can equally provide for the kids' basic needs.
Because I did think that at one point in my life where I was just thinking, why doesn't, instead of the child support, for example, why not just give the child to the parent who has the money to provide for that child? And then during this conversation, as well as I got older, I began to realize the money is just one aspect, right? Like, do you want, especially, I guess, based on the age, do you want a parent that is just saying, okay, I have a 10-bedroom house, and they leave the child to their own devices and they're never
Exactly.
around? Whereas the other parents may be able to do the doctor appointments, the school appointments, the after school appointments, but the lifestyle would be different, but the experience is much, much better, right?
Yes, absolutely. Much more interactive, hands-on. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So for those who are married, Tracey, now, what are some of the ways that they could avoid getting to family court and maintaining what they have? Or even, I'll ask this question. If you have a couple that are looking to dissolve their relationship, marriage, common law, otherwise, would it be advantageous for them to do it outside of the court, either through mediation or just amongst themselves, and why?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, because a lot of times what happens when you get involved with family court is they prolong the process. They make the process much more convoluted and complex and much more high conflict than it needs to be, especially when lawyers get involved. Because when lawyers get involved, they do complicate things, unfortunately. So if you can resolve it on your own, again, make sure you do your due diligence. Make sure you know what the law is, what you're entitled to. Make sure you know the likelihood of things working out in your favor by looking at the law. And then absolutely, if you can negotiate amongst yourselves and then have an attorney review your settlement agreement, or through mediation, or through another process that's called collaborative divorce, where again, it's an alternative to the actual high conflict divorce process. Absolutely, that is definitely a viable option. Again, do not go in thinking that everything is going to be a breeze, and make sure you're aware of all the decisions you're making, and make sure you're fully informed about the decisions you're making. But absolutely, if you can avoid it, definitely you sure should, because not only will you be saving money, you'll be saving yourself time and headaches and sleepless nights.
As we close, Tracey, any advice you want to give to my audience or the next generation of couples who are hoping that they can have a peaceful separation and not have it as complicated as you mentioned that it can get?
There is no excuse for people to not have information, period. With the internet and every other source out there, the only thing I suggest you do is double check. Always verify the information, but you have to find your information. You have to do your own research. You have to know what the laws are. You have to know the family court process and how it works. You have to know who the key players are. You have to know that. You have to estimate what it's going to cost you in time, in sweat equity, and in money. You have to know these things. You should not. There's no excuse to go into any court or any divorce or any separation without knowing. It's absolutely, ignorance is no longer an excuse anymore. It's not, because there's too much information out there for you to not know. The other thing I also want to say is people are getting ripped off by family law attorneys. Again, I blame you for that, because not you per se, but I blame the litigants for that. Because if you don't do your own research and you don't vet these lawyers the way you should, then you're giving somebody 100% control, and you can't blame them for the outcome. Blame yourself. So those two things are definitely pieces of advice that I always say to anybody who asks.